Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it? Disruption has become the new normal. With change, it's always gradually, then suddenly, well, things really have stopped happening gradually. This change is exponential. Everything that used to be dumb and disconnected is now wired and intelligent. Cars, cities, ports, farms, even our bodies will be wired with sensors and will talk to each other. However, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will become extremely valuable. Human-only traits such as creativity, imagination, intuition, emotion, and ethics will be even more important in the future, because machines are very good at simulating, but not at being. Yes, robots and software will do some of our work, but this will allow us to focus on things that cannot be automated. To imagine change squared, you've got to start engaging more with what might be, not just with what is. Immerse yourself in the immediate future, 5 to 7 years out from today. The future doesn't just happen, the future gets happened. The new way to work is to embrace technology, but not to become it. The future is in technology, yet the bigger future lies in transcending it. Let's live and lead from here.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Aidan, thanks very much for that introduction. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon. Delighted to be in the O'Mahony Hall, and delighted to see so many people so heavily engaged in this very, very important topic. Particularly poignant for me, as Aidan said, I'm a graduate of DCU back in 1995, so it's a long, long time ago. The O'Mahony Hall didn't even exist. But anyway, but I suppose it's the first comment. You know, I studied here, and I studied applied physics. And I suppose, what's an applied physics guy doing being managing director of AIB? Well, I suppose it just shows that the reality is, you know, all industry requires people who can actually think, who can actually really, really change the way we perceive businesses, how reimagine businesses, and think about the future possibility of the future. And I would just encourage everybody, when they think about their own career options, don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to your own natural discipline. I think it's really important to think very, very laterally about the skills you're developing here and how you'll apply that in future life and where you'll bring it next. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes or so just about AIB's story around digital transformation. I'm going to start really by talking about digital transformation in financial services. I'll be very brief on this because I'm sure there's many people in the audience could give this part of the conversation better than I could, right, in terms of what's happening in industry. I suppose, look, it doesn't take me to stand here and talk to you about the level of disruption that's happening across all industries. And I think, you know, those examples that are on the wall are overused. But I would point to two things that I think are really important when you ask yourself why and how this is happening. The first one is those companies that have disrupted industries have managed to find a different way of connecting with the consumer than traditional players have. In many ways, they've connected emotionally with the consumer. They have found some form of friction in the way business is normally conducted, and they've exploited that to create a totally different business model. That is how those businesses have actually disrupted industries. The reality is, when we look at how the second factor around that, that disruption is happening at a pace that nobody could ever have imagined. The disrupted are now becoming disrupted. The reality is we now see businesses and business models, and I mean entire business models, getting replaced in less than 18 months. That is unheard of when you think about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have taken a generation for businesses to evolve and be replaced by alternative models. But what digital transformation has enabled to happen now through that connectivity with the customer in a different way, the proliferation of technology and the ability to actually connect with the customer really seamlessly in a really different way than historically, it has enabled rapid adoption. And adoption of new ways of doing things will happen quite simply when the sum of the benefits outweigh the sum of the inhibitors. If any service provider can provide a different way of doing something that alleviates friction but presents the equation that the sum of the benefits outweighs the sum of the inhibitors, you will get adoption of that way of doing things. And that is effectively what we're seeing across all industries. Now, banking is no different. I know that is not meant to be an eye test, but I apologise for that. But essentially, what that tries to illustrate, believe it or not, are the level of disrupting companies that are operating in Ireland today in the financial services landscape. Quite shocking. You know, when you break down the anatomy of a bank and the services it provides to its customers, that's the level of interaction that's now happening, or alternative providers that are trying to take tiny bits of the value equation between a bank and its customers and exploit friction in that to arrive a different way of actually doing business with customers. We look at this in this way, right? When we look at it from the point of view of fintech disruption, technology disruption, what's actually happening? If I can walk you through the 4 quadrants of what you see here. Banks historically have been good at adopting technology, right? The ATM, if you believe it or not, was an invention probably in the 1980s that transformed the way cash was actually distributed. Prior to that, obviously, branches were far more prevalent as the way of people accessing their cash. So the use of technology, be it credit cards, ATMs, anything, digital banking, online banking, etc., telephone banking even back in the day, isn't new to banking. So banks are good at adopting technology in terms of actually providing services. But the pace at which they do that sometimes leaves them laggards to what's happening in wider industry trends from a fintech perspective. These specialist fintechs that we see emerging now, be it N26, Revolut, etc., TransferWise in the payments space, looking at lending, be it funding club, lending club, etc., there's lots of different players starting to emerge here. Are these players a significant threat to the banking industry? Yes, and I'll talk more about that in a moment in terms of what we likely see happening as regards to the profitability of the banking system as a result of this. But what's more interesting is we probably have to think about how do we actually partner with these companies to actually provide better services to our customers such that we can survive in the future. And I'll come back at that in a moment. Also, some banks are launching standalone fintech offerings now. Alternative brands that they want to appeal to their customers in a niche way so that they can feel that the traditional channel is there, but they've also actually come out with an alternative brand that may appeal to a different type of segment and therefore keep themselves relevant in terms of how we do it. Who are the winners and losers in all this? It remains to be seen. But the reality is, for banks to really be able to embrace this and be able to survive in this ever-changing world, if I was talking about this 3 or 4 years ago, I would be talking all about the threat, the disruptive threat that could occur as a result of these players coming into the banking system. Today we talk about partnership, because the reality is these companies, these fintech companies, have excellent new ideas and opportunities to engage customers in a different way, but traditional banks have the customers. So the synergy that can affect here is if banks can find a way of partnering with fintech companies, then there can be a win-win all around, whereby you're offering enhanced technology solutions to your customers while also maintaining your customer franchise and the shape of your franchise going forward. And why did we come to that conclusion? Well, it's simple reality. When you look at the vectors of what actually differentiates a fintech company versus a traditional bank, what are the swaying factors that give fintech's competitive advantage versus what gives traditional banks competitive advantage? I've spoken about the fact that traditional banks have customers. They also have large infrastructures to support credit, processing, etc., etc. They're regulated entities, so they engage regulators all the time and they understand how to do that. So there's an awful lot of parts of being a bank that probably doesn't appeal to a fintech company because it actually brings a huge amount of overhead and a huge amount of complexity into their business model that they're not interested in. What the fintech has is that niche technology solution, that differentiated offering that exploits the friction. They also probably have a brand, appeal that appeals to a new segment that is really, really important as regards how we evolve this into the future. Is this going to have a disruption effect? Yes, it is. We estimate today as we stand here today, that probably about 7% of banks' profitabilities have been sucked away into alternative providers as a result of that. 20%, or maybe even up to a third, of actually new customers that have come into the channels in the last number of years. So that means these brands and these opportunities or these fintechs are appealing to an emerging sector, and therefore banks have to respond to that if they want to be able to compete in terms of how they actually go forward. So what has AIB done about this? Well, we recognised this threat quite some time ago, and we decided to embark on a 3-year large capital investment in our business to fundamentally transform our business model. So over a period from 2012 through to 2018, as illustrated here, we've invested €870 million in the reinvention of the bank. The absolute redeployment of new channel technology, mobile banking, new interfaces to the customer, opening up our open APIs, creating an infrastructure whereby the bank can be seen as a modern, easy to do business with provider for our customers today and our customers of the future. 870 million investment in that infrastructure in order to make sure that we remain competitive. In doing so, we have been able to take out 400 million of cost out of our operating model at the same time. So from a payback perspective, that's been very attractive in terms of how the economics of the bank operate. Because ultimately, as customers adopt these alternative channels and new ways of doing business, then you can actually shrink down your traditional channels and you can actually create greater cost efficiency in your fundamental operating model. The secret here is around actually being really, really au fait and knowing what the customer needs. Identifying what are the next things, the innovations that are likely to change the industry, and how do you have an ability within your business to be able to adapt to that and actually respond to that in a real way. And the impact on our business has been very profound. When you look across the profile of transactions over that period, back in 2013, on an average day, you had 880,000 transactions going through the AIB system on a daily basis. That now stands at the first half of this year at 1.5 million. So the reality is putting in all these extra services, putting in all these extra channels, doesn't deplete the level of transactions that's going through your infrastructure, it increases the level of transactions. But the shape of what channels people are using, it's probably intuitive, has changed dramatically. Mobile banking is now our #1 channel of connectivity to customers every single day. Over 1 million of AIB's customers use mobile banking every single day to engage with the bank. We benchmark ourselves against European peer banks to determine how does that compare against other banks in Europe, etc. We are top quartile in Europe in terms of the level of usage that people in our customers are using our app for versus European banks across Europe. When you think about it, that's a small bank operating in an island off mainland Europe has managed to create that platform whereby we now engage with our customers that frequently over that channel. We're really proud of this because it has created a really strong platform that we think we can grow on in the future, and I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. This depicts that and shares some of the statistics that you can see there. I've talked about the level of connectivity that we're now having, on average over 30 logons per month, which is daily. That lots of retailers will give their right arm to have that level of connectivity with their customers, and how we actually use that into the future as a key area. So where is all this going? What happens next? I've talked about transformation, I've talked about the threat, I've talked about how the bank has responded up until this point, but what do we see happening next as regards we go forward? Well, if I go back to that point of how we embrace the ecosystem and how we engage with fintech providers, we are recognising that there's a whole new set of skills are required in the bank in order to be able to survive in this ever-changing world. In order to make sure we are fully au fait with the emerging competitive threat that fintech presents, but also how we embrace it and collaborate with it in a way to provide better services to our customers, this is the model we now operate. First of all, it's around understanding up there in part A, incubate and seed, scanning the horizon, knowing what's going on across all the parts of your infrastructure, what's happening to different service providers, what's happening internationally, and how can we actually pick the things that we believe will make a difference in terms of how we operate into the future. We've created a growth incubator within our business where we will ask businesses to come in, startup businesses to come in and incubate their business within AIB so that we build together. And we'll invest in them so that they actually thrive, and therefore we create a future horizon that we know is better for our customers and will long term be better for the business. So partnerships are key. Direct investments in different providers so that we actually start to take a seed capital position in fintech providers so that we understand how that's going to emerge into the future and also get to shape how that emerges into the future, and ultimately also take VC investments at the appropriate juncture in different companies. So this is a totally different way of thinking about the problem. The types of skills we need to be able to do this aren't traditional banking skills or even IT skills. This is ability to actually scan the horizon, understand what's going on, the right type of environment around making good investment decisions, proper M&A activity, etc., and also the right culture around partnership. We can't be the big bad bank that the small fintech finds difficult to do business with. We have to be open. We have to be able to provide an infrastructure whereby we can partner and we can really, really embrace the future together. And that brings me to open banking, because the reality is we believe this is the fundamental future of how the industry is going to shape. And we're delighted to be the first bank in Ireland that opened up our sandbox there a few weeks ago in terms of open APIs that we now provide to anybody who wants to build applications on the back of the AIB infrastructure. And this is learning from the best of the likes of Google, etc., that have had this for quite some time and have enabled companies like MyTaxi to emerge that are building a new product on the back of the fact that I use GPS services and an interface into what Google can provide me as regards map services, etc., and bring a different proposition to market as a result of that. We want to be that for banking. We want to provide the mechanism whereby fintech companies can actually engage with us and really, really understand how they evolve and we evolve with them so that we fundamentally change the shape of banking. What do we think this is all going to look like? We think we're moving into the advent of the wave of what we call smart banking. So again, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been talking about mobile banking as the thing that was going to change the face, and it did change the face of banking. The next evolution is smart banking, and it really means combining mobility, analytics, and AI and robotics together to create a transformative proposition for the customer into the future. So the reality is now everybody's carrying around the bank in their pocket, right, from the point of view of having the bank, 1 million customers, as I said, logging in every single day on this. So they carry the bank in their pocket. The level of insight that can give around the type of behaviours that customers have with their money and how they better manage their money is the next wave of how you actually provide value-added services to customers. Giving people the opportunity to not just set savings goals, budget goals, financial calendars, etc., but actually predictive capability around when is it safe to spend, what do people like me do, how can I do better, how am I doing versus my peer group, easy visualization of how I manage my money better, and providing the opportunity whereby customers get to feel that the bank is a true partner of theirs. That we're providing through the insight not just a platform that is a transaction platform, but actually something that gives insight to the customer around how they actually make their life better. That, we believe, is the future of banking. That's where we believe this is all going, and we as I say, it is that combination now of having mobility, analytics, and AI together that will actually create that. With that, thank you very much.
So just to give Robert maybe a rest first, I might ask a couple of general questions and maybe something to do with manufacturing, and then we can go back to some of the financial areas as well. So I suppose one of the first questions, is, if everybody's interested in this, is what's the general view from you guys who are really involved in this in terms of Ireland's capability, positioning to really do well in digital transformation, and in particular, infrastructure-wise, have we got the kind of correct infrastructure to support this? So whoever would like to take that first.
Yeah, I can start off. So I guess there is typically quite a big gap between the multinational presence in the country and our SME, more indigenous companies. At a multinational level, there's a much bigger appetite for investment, looking at long-term returns. And that's a bit of a struggle for smaller companies who may need to look at something where you're looking for a 12-month horizon to break even on your investment. So in manufacturing in particular, some of the technologies are capital intensive, robotics or additive manufacturing machinery that might cost $500,000 at a pop. So that's one of the struggles we have, I guess, from an investment point of view. On the positive side, there are a lot of government support schemes. So between the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, Science Foundation Ireland, there's an ecosystem there for manufacturing research that spans from the university academic institutions all the way up to closer to market help at prototyping and getting a product out to market. So I think from a people point of view, there is a good infrastructure there that companies can leverage. I guess we are a bit behind on what I would call demonstrator or test beds. So some companies like in Europe, like Germany and the Netherlands, would have these very large, high-tech centers that companies can go to develop their products and get them out into the market quickly. And I think from an infrastructural point of view, we're probably a little bit behind on that. But we, again, have opportunity to leverage that European infrastructure and partner with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Ireland is better positioned than we would have been in the past, at least for a lot of the early industrial work, and this is going back 100, 200 years. We were competing with countries that have a really long heritage. So if you think of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering over the years, this was never something Ireland really engaged with. I mean, we had a very large neighbour, very successful in industrialisation of work, and this was never us. But with Industry 4.0 digitalisation, the fact is it's all about software and creativity, and there's really no legacy on that anywhere except maybe Silicon Valley to a degree, but that's relatively recent. So I think for us, we have an excellent chance of either catching up or overtaking some of our neighbours on this topic, and the heritage matters much less. So for me, to your points, I think that the ecosystem matters a lot. We do have, I'd say, to get going on a lot of this, but we're not as far behind as we would have been in some of the traditional activities like making power stations or trains or cars, these kind of things. But really huge amount of potential from Ireland, a huge amount of potential from the workforce here. And it's acknowledged we do software really well, we do fintech really well, we do some things around gaming really well, we have some really good clusters of manufacturing. So putting all those together, I think we're actually quite well positioned, recognising we still have some catching up around the ecosystem to do.
And Robert, I probably would have said a few years ago as a consumer of technology, but I think things have totally changed, and you're now both a user of technology but a developer of technology, and particularly your new initiatives with the API interface, etc. Any views from your point of view?
Yeah, well, actually, I fully agree with the points already made, and just building on it, I think we have a huge advantage in that the market in Ireland is actually of a scale and size that you can really influence it. So we're a fantastic petri dish, whereby, with a population of less than 5 million people, you can really change status quo very quickly in a market like this compared to North America or other markets, etc. Now, what I think holds us back as regards that is we don't really have the mindset and culture of safe to fail. And having lived in the States for a while, when you look at the Silicon Valleys and that, a big differentiator is, they just dust themselves down and pick themselves up and keep going. If something goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. The Irish psyche doesn't allow for that as well, and I think it's something we have to actually try and become better at in our business thinking, because I think it holds us back as regards the necessary innovation that we need to breed in the country that will actually enable that petri dish be the leading light of how to change the way consumers consume in all industries.
Okay. And just that point I raised earlier is, I've no doubt processing capability, storage capability will grow exponentially, as will data. But is our communications infrastructure going to be able to work with this, or is that a concern?
If we're talking about broadband, it's absolutely a concern, and I think that there's a lack of realisation of how much of an enabler that is for people to do all the things that we speak about, like flexible working, but able to handle big quantities of data, all of these things. The general infrastructure, I think, is not so bad. I think we tend not to be challenged with getting data out of manufacturing sites and using it and sending it back fairly close to real time. At least we're as good, I think, as any other country for that. And mainly because we rely on data centres much more than we rely on the connectivity. But I think the broadband topic is a massive topic, really. If you're not in a multinational, you really struggle. Yet individual contributions are huge from people who work in their home. And I think if we're really going to take advantage of the capabilities we have here, we have to solve that problem more or less straight away, I think.
Okay.
Just to add to that, outside of the ecosystem, within a manufacturing facility, I think we've gone a long way towards generating big data. There's so many sensors now added to the machines that we have that is generating a ton of data that in theory is supposed to increase our efficiency and our competitiveness. But talking to a lot of companies, they've got to that stage, and then it's, how do I actually get the needle out of the haystack from all this data and make some improvement? So there is, even though we talk a lot about machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's still a long way to go to take that data, generate something useful out of it, and again have the human interaction that's going to make some use out of it.
Okay. So Robert has given us some really good background on the business case for digital transformation in the finance sector. I suppose from the manufacturing point of view, what are the business cases for introducing digital technologies, digital transformation in manufacturing?
Well, okay, I'll start. I think the main driver really at a high level is competitiveness, both at a company level and a national level. And when you look at business cases that people generate to make these kind of investments, there's two aspects of that competitiveness. One is efficiency. So reduced cost, whether it's a labour cost or increased yield or better quality, how can this digital technology that I'm going to invest in improve my bottom line? So that's a very easy one to do the maths on. The second one is, how's it going to grow my business? So if I'm generating all this data off my machinery, can I convert that into something new of a business model? So if I'm a supplier in a business-to-business transaction, can I do better than my competitor by offering, summarized quality data up automatically to my customer? Or if I'm selling something to an end user, can I more easily troubleshoot the problems they have by knowing exactly the history of the product that they're talking to me on the phone or engaging with me over the internet about solving? So it's really around efficiency or generating more, return from a business point of view. At a national level, it can be different as well. So I think the US are trying to reshore a lot of manufacturing. And how do you do that? So you try to take the labour cost out or make it a much smaller piece. And digitalization is helping with that. China, again, are in a race around artificial intelligence because they've taken a lot of those manufacturing jobs and they want to keep them. So how do they stay ahead of the US in that technology leap? And then there are other countries like Japan where it's more, they have a strong heritage for a long time in robotics. And some of that is driven by demographics. They know that they have an aging population. They're ahead of the rest of the world in terms of aging population and aren't too keen on immigration. So there's a big necessity that's driving that automation just based on demographics. So it can vary around the world from a national point of view.
Yeah, I think to add to that, there's still a lot of uncertainty in industry in general around what is the real business case. And a lot of the time people compare a very new idea around digital transformation with their standard business models, which look for a payback within 1 year or maybe 3 or 4 years for capital goods. And it's really hard to assess when you start a project where the outcome is maybe not that well understood or not that known. So there's a bit of research and a bit of risk involved. And I think that's one of the major challenges for people moving quickly in this space is it's not that well understood. But I think coming back to the ecosystem and organizations like John is involved with iForm, you really have to work in an environment where that's de-risked. So those first projects, you're not on the hook for all the investment, that you have a better chance of really assessing in a low-risk environment how these things will work and how quickly they will work. Because in a manufacturing environment, especially if you're in a multinational, you tend to be held to a fairly high performance standard in relation to what you do with the company's money. So taking a lot of risks is not that well appreciated, I would say. And the more you can work with universities, the more you can work with innovation centres, the more you can work with startups, the more likely it is you'll have a successful outcome in the first 1 or 2 when you try them. And then the goal is very much to build from that. But it's still not an exact science in terms of everyone understands how a forklift truck or a new conveyor line will pay off. Very few people understand what it's like in digital transformation.
Okay. So another question related to manufacturing. I have a feeling this is going to be something that somebody's got a particular interest in. So what is the promise of additive manufacturing, for example, 3D printing for both manufacturing and consumers?
Okay, well, iForm, the centre that I work in, is probably about 70% of our research is in the additive manufacturing space. And I suppose there are a couple of industries who have adopted, or kind of almost in a mature phase of adoption in additive manufacturing. One is medical devices where, from hearing implants to for teeth or orthopedic implants, there's a large majority of those now are being 3D printed or additive manufactured, and it's because they need to be customized or they are more comfortable and work out better from a patient point of view if they're customized. The second industry would be aerospace, where lightweighting and reducing component count are very important. And the famous example is General Electric have this fuel nozzle as part of one of their jet engines. that used to be 20 pieces that were complex added together, and now they're printed in one piece. Last week they shipped their 30,000 one of those. So in most planes that you're a passenger in today, there are additive manufactured piece components. So they're two mature industries. For me, the next big phase is what they call digital inventory. So this is part, I guess, of the digital transformation of companies, and it's much more broad-based. And the idea is that you don't have a spare parts inventory. It's all digital, and you use additive manufacturing to generate a spare part or a repair when you need it. Yeah. That will start in business, and then it will move into consumers, where it fits in very well with sustainability and this whole idea of trying to reuse and repair rather than throw out something that breaks and just buy a new one. Yeah. That second part might take a little bit longer. And I guess the last promise of 3D printing or additive manufacturing is in this whole area of point-of-use production. So you can make it where you're going to use it. That's both an opportunity and a threat for a country like Ireland with a small population. A lot of stuff could be reshored to the larger population basis, where it's actually been manufactured very close to where the user is using it. But I think where this will first show up is probably more extraterrestrial than on Earth, where all manufacturing in space, the research around it is in this 3D printing space. So how do I take materials or use the raw materials that are available on the moon and in probably 20 years on Mars to actually build things using 3D printing technology. So it is an example of, I suppose, digital transformation in manufacturing, one that's a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah. Anything from your side on that as well?
I think from our perspective, the flexibility of manufacturing is hugely important, and additive is a huge part to play in that. I also think the opportunity for us is in digital inventory is actually in owning the digital files that are effectively printed on demand and where they're required. So I think it's in first look, it looks like a big threat in terms of offshoring or reshoring of manufacturing or moving it close to the destination market. But for a country which is very strong in software, very strong in digital engineering, we can own the IP that sits behind that, no matter where the products are made or what the destination market looks like.
Okay. So we're in DCU, it's a university environment. I think this is particularly relevant. How do companies, I suppose, from all sides of industry, how do companies engage with research performing institutions to help them go through digital transformation in all areas of business?
I can just give you a couple of examples in terms of what we're working with. And one thing is our office is based in DCU Alpha, and we find that's a really nice environment in terms of being able to cut down a lot of barriers. Previously our office was in the city centre, and you tended to meet and work with like-minded people, so we were always working with companies like utilities like ESB, those kind of companies. We find there's a lot more innovation happens a lot quicker in the cafeteria in DCU than it does happen in our offices a lot of the time. We find that the ability to get things done quickly in a university environment is good after the long introduction and the dance around IT and all of these things. But once we get through that, we find there's some really good work done. We're doing a collaboration with NIBRT, which DCU are also members of, and that's around disruptive process control in biopharmaceuticals. And again, once we get started, and that's a little bit us, a little bit NIBRT in terms of how long it takes, the speed that the guys work at compared to how we work in an operating environment is much, much better. The creativity that they bring is much better. We're, I would say, constrained by our own thinking because we have running businesses typically where we know what we have to do on a day-to-day basis. We try to keep those rules away from our university colleagues and just let them at it, and what they produce is faster, better quality and quite more disruptive than we would do ourselves. So, for me, the starting point has to just jump in, find somewhere that you can work and engage with people and just chat to them before you ever think about doing a formal program. And I think you just have to be physically in the same location to talk through some topics or just even to meet people, understand how they work, what they do. Some of the earlier speakers I thought had really good topics around. You just have to, from a, let's say, student perspective or from the academic colleagues, you just have to turn up and talk to people about what you can do, and that's where the opportunities come from.
Okay. Just to add, there is a good infrastructure of technology centres that are combinations of universities and institutes of technologies around the country that have different themes, like manufacturing or data science, materials development, and it's about trying to plug in there. And I think, as Donald mentioned, a lot of it is de-risking.
Yeah.
So for companies, even startups, that concept of being able to look at your technology roadmap and know you're not going to get to something that might be promising, but you can get some level of state support to investigate it, and it might be a long-term play that's brewing there, and all of a sudden it comes into focus and you're ready to take it on.
And same with AIB,
no, I agree with everything, and I think, you know, it's a two-way street. I think the universities have to be very open as well to hearing where industry is trying to get to, so that actually it's an open dialogue and it's not a solution looking for a problem or a problem looking for a solution, but actually it's a synergistic relationship. But I think for larger companies then as well, it's really, really important that the universities produce the right type of graduates that can actually bring the industry forward again, right? Because it can't stand still. And the type of skills that now are coming out of universities, it's critical that they are fit for purpose for the type of business world that we're all now operating in, compared to maybe what was produced 20 years ago.
And I suppose, just again, given the fact that this is a disruptive and changing technology, is it changing where maybe 10 years ago the relationships would have all have been with the School of Computing or the more technological areas, that now the business school is, you know, if not more, you know, if not as important, even more important to engage with?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, for something like a business school, you know, that point around the skills and the rounding out of skills and understanding what the digital transformation has happened to the way businesses operate, and having that right kind of output is really, really important. But it also means moving into new areas like data analytics and data science, and these things that are actually critical to actually driving the future economy.
Okay.
I think if you look both at a national and EU level, a lot of encouragement is coming through to try and make bigger consortia of companies and countries to try and tackle larger problems around sustainability. So there are mechanisms, for example, that the European Union will provide funding for collaborations across nationalities and across both universities and companies. They're looking to have bigger projects with bigger funding and trying to solve bigger problems rather than smaller bits. So it's that collaboration piece. I mean, if you're looking for a skill for the future, it's been able to project manage really large collaborations effectively is definitely something that will be in demand as well.
Okay. I don't know, are we going to have time for some questions from the floor as well? Yeah, so do we want to start to take those maybe? So anybody, any questions for our panelists? Hard to see, so don't all rush to. Okay, so I suppose one last question I have would be what your message would be to Irish SMEs regarding digital transformation. I mean, probably we're all used to thinking of it in the bigger picture, but what about the SME community particularly? Any kind of comments or views?
I might start. So we do a lot of research into this, because obviously from the point of view of how SMEs are embracing technology, and it depends on the industry, right? You could look at the agri sector, you can look at tourism, you can look at lots of different industries, and there are varying degrees of which different businesses embrace technology in general, but also digital opportunity to actually change the way they do their business. You know, we are still behind where we need to be as a country in terms of the true embracing of digital as a means to connect with our customers, and how businesses can transform their own businesses internally by truly embracing technology. I think, you know, we still, within, you know, 99% of companies, you know, in Ireland are micro SME type companies, and they don't have the, you know, internal mechanisms to really get their head around what is required in this space to really compete in a digital age, and it's an issue. And I think it's something that, you know, SMEs have to embrace, and different industries are going to be disrupted at a different pace to others. But certainly, if you're running a small, you know, hotel sector business, for instance, and you don't understand, you know, how to actually use online booking platforms and the likes, you're not going to be in business for very long. So you really need to make sure somebody in your business understands this stuff and is operating to a way to transform the business thereby.
Yeah, I think we see the challenge is quite similar for small companies. I mean, you do need to carve out some time to start working in the digital world or preparing yourself for it. And I mean, we would see with a lot of the partner companies we have, the starting point is typically bringing in some digital tools to what you currently do, then trying to add something to your existing business that brings an element of digital to it. But we see the best and the most progressive companies probably looking at how do they add a digital business to what they currently do externally facing. So this might be a mechanical engineering company that starts to issue a lot of their designs in 3D simulation rather than building prototypes. And that in itself is a whole new business area where we see some success. So you need that range of internally enabling on the one hand, but also looking to the market for digital business as opposed to your standard day-to-day business.
Okay. I mean, we've a lot of startups that are non-capital intensive, that might be software or business model based, but I encourage SMEs to look at, particularly ones who are making physical products. There are industries out there that there are higher barriers to entry because they may be capital intensive, but there might be larger profit pools. And it's about trying to club together and then working with state bodies to see how do you disrupt something like that might have a barrier to entry, but there's a big opportunity if I can reinvent it with some kind of digital component and offer something to customers in that space that's better value and still make good profit. Okay. So I think we often focus about doing stuff in the space that's non-capital intensive, but I think we're probably ignoring potential profitable areas there.
Just a general question. I mean, with digital transformation, I'm seeing a huge growth in requirements for compliance, increased regulation because of the scope for risk and so on. Any views on that? And I suppose in particular how larger organisations like the banks or even some of the big manufacturing organisations might be able to help suppliers and customers to deal with that, because there's kind of a view that it's a growing problem for SMEs, is that compliance could become so unwieldy and so costly it may preclude them from doing business with some larger companies.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, it starts with lots of discussion, because compliance is quite a difficult topic in terms of making systems compliant for the next 5 years. So we would see that there's a real requirement for people to start discussions early and making systems more open, so that instead of it being locked at each door where you can't get access to something and you're almost submitting faxes to try to move from one system to the other, you actually have to open it up a bit more. I mean, like your example around open up APIs that are really good quality, where you actually build that into the design of your systems as opposed to look at it as an afterthought. So you have to start with the perspective that you're going to have a lot of integration requirements. So start with the beginning of make your system pretty robust in terms of compliance, so that it's also, if you can be one system between all the players in the supply chain, then that makes life a lot easier when it does come to compliance, because then you have a very straightforward way of validating. You're essentially using one data source, one data set, which is held in one place. And it becomes a lot easier when it comes to the development of that over time. You're not looking at separate systems with maybe different logical approaches to either security or data protection or any of those compliance topics, including product design and validation around medical
would you see maybe scope for a more collaborative approach between suppliers and customers?
Yeah, I mean, we think that the supply chain has to connect right the way through to customers, so that it's not companies working on behalf of an end customer to their supply chain. Their supply chain has to see right through to how a customer uses the product. You see that a lot in automotive, where it's actually the manufacturer of, let's say, the dashboard and the electronics is different to the ultimate car manufacturer, and that company has access to the data from existing cars about how customers use their product. But you've got to do that in a way which is compliant around data privacy and all of those things. So having that structure set up early and working well is really, really important. So, I mean, for me, integration is one of the biggest topics right through the value chain. So the person who makes even a very small part of your final product is contributing to the overall compliance of your final product and all the data that goes in between.
Okay.
There's another angle of trying to get involved early in standards development, or trying to predict where things are going by being involved in ISO committees and the different types of standards that are out there. I mean, trying to turn it into a business opportunity where if you're shaping the standards and shaping how compliance has to be met, you could actually potentially come up with solutions that other companies would be forced to use to meet that standard. So that's another way to try and get ahead of it.
Okay. And just last question, from the banking point of view, do you see that as well with customers, or would it be on your radar?
No, absolutely. Look, I think, even the biggest companies that were the darlings of the tech boom have learned to their peril in the last 12 months, ignore compliance and proper good data management and everything else at your peril. So, how this emerges and how companies survive in an ever-digitized world, it is a big part of getting your head around what is digital transformation, understanding with this huge opportunity comes great responsibility.
Okay. Thanks very much. I think we're getting the shout to finish up. So I'd like to thank our panellists for, I think, a really good discussion, great presentation on the financial area. Thanks for your input, and hopefully everybody got something from that. So I'd like to just ask you to give a round of applause to our panellists.